frankly, I thought it'd give me the secret formula. I thought once I'd interviewed 100 women,
yes.
who were the first woman to do anything.
That's why I do Women Who Go For It.
Hi, I'm Jolene Cheng. Welcome to Women Who Go For It. It's a video series designed to empower and motivate women to step up and take action to lead happier lives. I interview intelligent, dynamic women. We look at their influences, their best practices, what they've learned along the way, and how they operate. When you watch these videos, look for one idea that you can use. You can test it for the next 2 weeks so you can elevate your level of happiness. Go for it. Today's guest is Myra McElhaney. She is a writer that speaks and helps people enjoy life. What I love about Myra is that she's so connected, and you can feel her supportive and encouraging energy. She's around many, many women, and particularly in the business community. And one of the books that she writes is about how to put your life back together after you lose someone. And we're all going to be in this boat at some point. And I certainly take comfort in knowing I can read her book and know about some of the phases and what to experience and how to make the most of it so I can get back on track. Please meet Myra.
I am Jolene with Women Who Go For It. And this is Myra McElhaney.
Yes.
So you were in training for Fortune 500 companies for a long time and then became a writer.
That's
and
right.
What's most excited we'll save for a little bit later. But take us through the transition.
Okay. I was a trainer, a corporate trainer for a Fortune 500 company for many years. And then after leaving that company, I realized that you could do that as an independent. So for many years, I worked as an independent contractor doing corporate training. And from that, I was often asked to speak at women's conferences and for luncheons for sales groups and to do speaking. So I transitioned more into speaking from the corporate training. Then I began writing in order to promote my speaking and training business. But I found that writing is something I really love. It's also, like speaking, it's storytelling. And it's teaching people, it's communicating with people. But with writing, you get to go back and revise what you've written and polish it up.
It's harder
Where
to
with
edit
speaking,
and
right?
Let me
exactly.
just zap that out.
Exactly. And so I found that I really do enjoy the writing. So now my focus is totally on writing. And then consequently, I'm asked to speak often now based on what I've written.
So why women? You talked about, you spoke a lot of women's groups. Why is that?
Right. Early on in working with corporate audiences, I found that my heart really is with the women in the audiences. And, I grew up with a sister and my mother and I were close. And so I've always been surrounded by women, and women's energy is really good for me. And I found that women were more receptive audiences too. So we would laugh and have fun and talk about all sorts of things, where the more business audiences were a little more stuffy than what I wanted to do. So I began working with women's organizations. I have been on the boards of over 6 organizations.
At the same time?
At the same time, yes. Probably about 10 overall, but 6 at one time.
I thought 3 was like,
I was like,
I did 3, but not 6.
Well, sometimes they're advisory boards, and so you don't really have to do anything. You just attend a meeting and give advice.
Okay.
But those are the ones that are the most fun.
Yeah.
But serving on boards, and some have been foundations that do works for women. Some have been professional organizations. Others have been just general networking organizations for women. And so working with that, I found that I like writing for business women. And so then I said to a friend who was in one of these women's networks I was in, you know what I'd really love to do is write for Atlanta Woman magazine. And she said, really? I'm friends with the editor. So that's how I first started writing. Exactly. Say it out loud. And so I started writing then for Atlanta Woman magazine, which is no longer around. And since then I've written for some other magazines and newspapers. And also my advice is quoted in a lot of national newspapers and publications on self-help type topics as well as business topics.
And is it also women oriented?
Usually it is women
because
oriented.
They're like, okay, well, this Myra gal, she's like in every single women's, because you're so networked.
Yes, I am very well networked. I'm in a lot of women's organizations, and I read a lot of women's magazines, and I'm often quoted in them as well.
Okay,
Yes.
she is in the know. So then the writing, because you're speaking a lot, but you are a writer that speaks.
Yes.
Is that right?
Right. And there's just a subtle difference because if you're speaking or you're doing training programs, then you have a certain expertise and you really want to speak about them. You may write an article here or there. You may have a book so that you can sell it back of the room or so you're perceived as a greater expert. But you most likely will have one book, and then that will be based on what you're writing and speaking. I mean, what you're training and speaking about. And as a writer, it happens when you're out in the park, but as a writer, writing is really where my heart is. And then occasionally I'm asked to speak or to do a workshop based on something I've written.
Okay.
And my goal is to do multiple books, not just have one book about an expertise, but to write multiple books and then speak based on those. So it's a subtle difference in the way you market yourself.
Okay, so then the writing piece, I'm a little bit antsy. not because I just saw the ant on her shoulder, but because she interviewed 100 women around the world who were the first to do things.
Right.
So tell us inspiration for that
Okay.
and some of the examples, because
Okay.
I love that.
Okay. As I was still doing corporate training then and speaking a lot. And of course, in that industry, so many people are going, oh, have you written a book yet? Are you going to write a book? And I was trying to think of ideas for books.
Yeah.
And I was sitting at a women's networking organization.
Imagine that.
Imagine that. And this woman stood to speak and she said, I was the first woman at Coca-Cola to... And I thought, you know what? I love these stories.
Yeah.
So I crossed my legs, got my notepad, was ready to take notes about her speech. And then I thought, oh, if I love these stories, so will everyone else. So while she spoke, I don't even know what she was the first woman to do. While she spoke, I outlined my book about first women and went on a mission to say, to interview women who were the first. And so I've interviewed women who were the first in their company to reach a certain level, like for certain companies, the first female C-level executive. I have interviewed women in government who were maybe the first female city manager or the first female mayor. I have interviewed the first woman to row a rowboat across the Atlantic Ocean. And, you know, why would anyone even do that? I've interviewed the first American woman to summit Mount Everest. And so I interviewed explorers as well as corporate women, women in government office, and women in communities.
And why
it's
did
great
you?
fun.
Because you were interested in that, or what else did it do for you?
Well, I was interested in it. I love those stories, and usually those are women who were doing something at an age where women were not used to doing it, obviously, otherwise they wouldn't have been the first women. And so I thought it would give me, quite frankly, I thought it'd give me the secret formula. I thought once I'd interviewed 100 women who were the first woman to do anything.
That's why I do women who go for it.
Exactly.
I want the secret.
Exactly. And then I would know exactly what to do, what to avoid. I would know that. Yes. And
I don't know if I want to hear the end of this.
Yeah, you don't. But the truth is we find our own secret formula. We really do.
Good.
But I heard amazing stories, and you hear cliches, things that have become cliches like do what you love. And you hear things like you need to focus and manage your time and balance and those things. But what these women told me were stories that made me truly understand what they meant. For example, I interviewed the first woman to ride a horse in the Kentucky Derby as a jockey. And she just loved horses. She just loved horses. And from the time she was a child, she loved horses. She used to work at a stable and muck out the stables just to be able to be around the horses. And then because she was there all the time, she began training horses. And she was hanging out with the jockeys, and then she began riding, and then they weren't letting women ride. And then when they were, she was there because she just was doing what she loved to do, which was be with the horses. And one thing led to another. There are other people who, they loved adventure or they loved airplanes. I interviewed the first female commander of a space shuttle, and she loved to fly. And it just happened that as she was pursuing flying, when she was a teenager, she started working at a pizza kitchen to save money, not for her first car, but for flying lessons. And then once she learned to fly, she wanted to go to flight school. At that point, they were not allowing women to be astronauts. But while she was in flight school, they changed that, and she became an astronaut. And I learned from her the importance of focus. She told me about chair flying, where she would sit in her dorm room and imagine the panel of the airplane, and she would sit in a straight chair and pretend to fly. And then she could save some money to rent time in an airplane and actually sit there, not taking off, but just sit in the plane, seeing the panel and practicing her flying in her mind.
Visualizing.
Visualizing, exactly. And so the first time she actually had the opportunity to fly, she had done that so many times in her head that it wasn't a new experience. She had already been there in her mind. And so that type of focus. So I learned a lot of those type things from those women.
So it's like you hear from people, oh, do what you want, you know, make yourself happy. It's like, okay, okay, I got through a couple questions now. So you're saying you're able to picture and gel. That's what you mean.
Yes, exactly.
And
exactly. And what does that look like in somebody else's life?
So from all of these interviews, what kind of things did you learn about yourself?
Well, one of the things I learned is that when you ask for something out loud, like saying I want to write for this magazine, when you are clear enough to ask for what you want and to say it out loud, you just may be talking to somebody who can make that happen. You never know.
At this park, you never even know.
Exactly.
I want a donut.
Exactly.
Now,
Yes.
there's a bakery.
Where is it? And so I learned that. I also learned that when you clearly state what you want, like when I said I'm interviewing women who are the first woman, people around me started coming up with women for me to interview.
Yeah.
People would say, oh, my mother was the first woman to do this. My neighbor was the first woman to do that. And they would put me in touch with people. And so it's, you know, there's a quote that when you decide clearly what you want, the universe conspires to help you achieve it. And I had that experience. I also learned about myself that I could do what I wanted to do, that it was possible. I would have never thought that I could interview somebody from another country. And I'm sitting at my computer one day in the basement typing away, and I get this call. Actually, I think it was an email. And she said, this is the U.S. Embassy in Norway. I had to get a map and see where that was. I'm like, what are you doing calling me? Well, it's that networking thing.
Yeah.
You know, you really are just 6 degrees of separation from anybody. An organization I was involved with was an international organization. A secretary in this Norway embassy, U.S. Embassy in Norway, was a member of that organization too. She heard about the book that I was doing, and she knew somebody she wanted me to interview. And so I learned that, you know, you really are just a few degrees away from whatever you want, and just ask for it, be clear about it, ask for it, and go for it.
Yes, go for it.
Go for it. Go for it. Yeah.
So as I am doing this series, Women Who Go For It, how did you vet? Because it's like a lot of people are like, oh, interview me. And
Yes.
oh, and so it's like, how did you vet people? Because
initially I didn't. If somebody said, oh, I was the first woman hired on a Thursday to, you know, I'm like, oh,
Break
okay,
leaves.
yes, exactly, we'll
Super.
do that. And then when you start getting to the higher level, like the first female commander of spatial, that kind of thing, you can do research. You can Google and you find out who they are because it's public. It's out there. There's a bio on their company website. There are articles about them. And so when it got to that level, it was pretty easy to see that they were legitimately who they were. And so thank goodness for the internet these days, because you can find anything, and you can find somebody's bio, you can find their LinkedIn, you can find. So I didn't do like a full-on investigation into their background, but if there were articles, if there were things about them online, or articles I could find, then that's sort of what I went with.
what was the reward? These ants are awesome. They're tickling.
Yes, and they're big ants too.
Atlanta ants.
Yes.
So what is the reward after interviewing some of these, let's say some of these ladies who are maybe 80 years old? I mean, tell me what that impact.
Yeah.
How did that feel?
Well, the women who are 80 years old, I learned you don't interview them. You tell them what you want to talk about, and you just sit back and take notes. Because they take control of the interview, and they tell you. And what I learned is that a lot of the people don't feel that their story is unusual, or that it's anything out of the ordinary.
Because it's just their life.
It's just their life. And I learned that a lot of times they didn't set out to be the first woman to do this or that. They just went on their path of doing, and the next logical step would come up. And then the next logical step, and then you figure out where do you want to go from there. And so I learned to trust a lot more, to trust that when I did something a few steps away from where I am now, the next steps would be revealed to me, that they would open up, that they would come up. So I learned to trust that.
So you can step out further.
Right.
And that comfort zone is getting broader and broader, and all the way it's around the world.
So I became very comfortable with not having to see that full set of stairs, but just to know if I take a few steps, the rest of the way will light up. There'll be options presented and you can take them.
So you can have more confidence in what you're doing.
Yes. I also learned not to beat myself up so much about mistakes. I remember once I was interviewing a woman, and somehow I was interviewing everybody by phone, and so I would sometimes have 5 or 6 interviews in one day, and it would be penciled into
I know what you're talking about. I know what you're talking about.
Yes, but at least I was at my phone. I didn't have to get out and drive and go to them. Yeah. And so I would just have it on the phone. And one lady, for some reason, I just completely forgot about the interview. So when she called me and said, "Oh, I thought we had an interview today," and I apologized profusely, and I mean profusely. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I don't know how I could have done this." And I learned that these women just say, "I'm sorry," and move on. You know, you don't have to punish yourself or beat yourself up because you have made a mistake. You just say, "I'm sorry, I overlooked that," and you move right on. And that was a big learning for me, because sometimes I tend to want to take a mistake that I've made, or a lack of judgment, or something that I did wrong, and let's
build a monument that stays there
exactly
forever.
Let's examine it, let's look at it, let's go to therapy about it, let's read the 2 or 3 books on why I might have done this. Let's build a monument to it, let's go have a party around the monument. And what you do is just drive right through it. And so I learned that. So there are just a lot of lessons that I learned.
Well, I love that you're doing that you have done that, because that's what I want to do, and get these lessons for people and to be inspired.
Yes.
So where are these
Well,
interviews?
They are still in a box.
Are they here?
They're here, and they're also recorded in a box in cassettes. You remember cassettes?
Cassettes.
Yes.
Okay.
Were those around when you were born?
Yeah.
Cassettes. I still have the cassettes. What else? Something else I learned that was another big aha for me, because I had, I had studied the law of attraction and the ask for what you want and go after it and make a plan and write your plan down and visualize it and create it and all of this. Yes, all of that.
Yes.
And I was pushing so hard to have that. And one of the things I learned is sometimes life throws you a curveball that you didn't expect and that you didn't plan for, and that you didn't create in your own life, at least not in any way that you are conscious of. I was about to send my information to an agent in New York who was going to work with me on publishing the book, and my husband was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And I don't know if you know anything about brain tumors, but a glioblastoma is like the deadliest tumor in the world. And so our lives changed instantly to being not about me publishing a book, not about him being the top salesperson in his company, but about going to treatments and doctor's appointments and tests and surgeries and what can happen and what can't happen. And I really learned through that there are times that some things are they just happen. You don't always get answers. You don't always understand the reason why. But you take what happens and you do with it what you can. And I got really clear on my priorities at that point, because the only thing that mattered was being with him. And one of the things I learned about being with someone who is terminally ill is no matter what happens, the only thing that matters is, did they know how much you loved them? So being with him, loving him, caring for him, being able to spend time with him, because a lot of that time he was still able to travel and snow ski and play racquetball and do the things he loved to do, but the time together became even more precious, and it's really sacred. And so from that, once he died, I was just really mad about, things not working out, and this book that I was supposed to write, and I say supposed to write, not just that I came up with this idea, but I really felt like I had prayed and that God had led me to do this project. And so now all of my belief system, all of my plans for my life, all of that just came crashing down, and it shattered my beliefs, it shattered my faith. And so I had to take time off and rebuild my own life and rebuild my own sanity, as it were. And so from that, it takes a long time to eat and drink yourself to death. Yeah, I thought I gave it a good try. But apparently it takes a long time. And so at some point you just have to say, okay, I'm going to put down the tequila bottle, get out of bed, dress, and get out in the world and do something, because I'm still here. I may as well do something with my life. And so I didn't go back to the book about first women. I may still at some point, but I didn't.
Yes, you will.
But what I did is I published 4 other books instead. And so at that particular point in my life, it was just too painful to go back to that, that I had put so much hope and so much energy and so much focus into, and then had it happen at that time in my life. And so I did write and publish 4 other books, but I will go back to that one someday.
So tell us about the one,
Yes,
this one, after losing your husband. So
Okay, yes, I wrote this book after losing my husband. I call the other one the book that wrote me, because when I started working on the book, and as you know, interviewing hundreds of women changes you. It changes what you're doing day to day. It changes your business focus. And so I call that one the book that wrote me. And this is the book I wrote.
So in case it's audio,
say
it for us.
Yes. This is building a life you love after losing the love of your life. And you can see the cover of the book. It's not a dreary book. It's bright colors. It's me in a convertible with a curvy road ahead, symbolizing that you don't know what's around the next curve. The sun is shining. It's a beautiful day. And if you look, there are storm clouds in the mirror of the rearview window, symbolizing having come through a storm and now enjoying life. So the book is about rebuilding a life that you love, no matter what's happened to you. And with women, maybe you didn't lose your spouse, but you've lost your parents, or your kids are gone off to school and now you have an empty nest, or maybe you've left the corporate job and you're trying to do a business on your own, or divorce. There's a lot of divorce with couples who've been together 20 plus years and now they're getting divorces. So you find that there's a point in your life where you say, I may not like what's happening in my life right now. I may not be able to change it, but I can still have a good life. I can still have a life that I love. And so that's what the book is about. The first chapter is called Sleeping with Jose Cuervo. And it's about that moment in my life when I, actually my sister had been with me when my husband died and through the funeral and the burial and all that. She didn't want to leave me. And there had been people in my house for, what seemed like a week. And I said, no, you don't understand. You have to get out of my house. I'm going to bed with a bottle of tequila, and you can, if I'm not out in 2 weeks, you can come get me. So that's where I talk about the deep grief and the mourning and the grieving. And there's a chapter about being angry with God. There's a chapter about after death communications, which some people feel they get signs from the person who's passed on. Okay. There are chapters about sifting through memories and discarding dreams, because you have to, when you lose something, again, whether it's a spouse in a death or divorce, or maybe it's the career that you have poured your life into, and then one day a new company buys and says, I don't want you. And you have to say, here are the memories I have of that wonderful life, and here are the dreams I had of what it would be that are never going to happen. So you sort through those and sift through those. I have written about dating or trying to date.
Yes, I'm listening.
Yes, and I just read today that there's an article about in Atlanta, and I'm in Atlanta, that women in my age group outnumber men 800,000 to 1.
What?
Yeah.
Oh!
So it looks like I'm going to have to move to the West Coast.
Or change, change your dating preferences. So.
Oh, well. But anyway, there's so many things I write about. There's one chapter, and this is the one that widowed people always call me and say, that chapter really got to me. Yeah. And it's called Married to a Dead Man. The moment that I realized that I knew my husband was gone, I knew that he wasn't coming back, but I realized I had not let go of the marriage. I was still seeing myself as a married person. I was still living as a married person. And I had to consciously let go of the marriage and say, I have a single life now. What is that going to look like? And rebuild friendships and find new friends and look at what am I going to do now that maybe I wouldn't have done before. So what's my life going to be like? And I think it's never too late to build a life you love.
So how many years, when did he pass?
He passed away, it'll be 7 years in June.
Okay.
Yeah. So it took a few years for me to get off the couch and put down the tequila bottle. And then it took a
You could
while.
offer sponsorship.
Right.
Right?
That's right. Sponsored by Jose. But also I had to get back to business doing other things before I could really come to a place where I could write about the experience. Yeah.
You know, as you're talking about that, I'm thinking definitely like divorce. I mean, it's a different,
Right.
as you mentioned, I mean, I'm divorced, I think 5 years.
Wow.
But it's like, you know, like feeling like I don't feel like a married person, but I didn't feel like single.
Right.
I'm only coming into my singledom this last year from my last boyfriend.
Right.
But I'm thinking
Yeah.
that's,
Because after, and these are just identifiers. Being divorced is not who you are, but it's something that happened to you and
Right.
it's something that changed your status. You're not a single person who's never married. You know what that's like. So being divorced it's different. And sometimes widows and widowers don't like for somebody who's been divorced to say, "Oh, I know what you mean. I've been divorced too."
Right.
But the truth is, when you're, loss is loss.
Right.
And when you are widowed, people surround you and they go, "Oh, I'm so sorry. This never should have happened to you. What can I do for you? Let me bring you a casserole. Let me mow your lawn." And when you're divorced, people don't bring you food. They don't mow your lawn. They just go, "Yeah,
Darn
everybody's
them.
divorced. Get over it." And you don't get the kind of support that you do.
No. Right.
So I have a lot more compassion for my divorced friends now too.
There's a bunch of us.
There
sister.
are. There sure are. A lot of divorced people, a lot of widowed people, a lot of people, actually, I find in my age range who've never married. And so there are a lot of people who are totally on their own. So it gives you a lot of people to go out with. Girlfriends.
Okay, yeah, exactly. Hopefully the ratio's a little better in Seattle. We will see.
Hopefully, yes. I'll be up there soon. I think Seattle was one of the cities that's good for dating. Yeah.
Oh, good. Well, except for the Seattle Freeze. So I have this show called Single in Seattle.
Uh-huh.
And so maybe you'll, look a few things up first. So
Maybe so. We'll have to look at that.
Ants, goodbye. So for the ladies who are watching right now, what's some advice? They're 30 to 50 years old and they're business professionals. What are things you've learned in your life so far that if only I would have known?
Yeah. Well, the one thing, and this again sounds cliche-ish, but don't be so hard on yourself. We worry about making decisions about career and making decisions about, trying to balance your child, your children if you have children, and your career and your marriage and all of that sort of thing. Don't be so hard on yourself. Stop feeling guilty about not being the perfect person, the perfect mother, the perfect employee, the perfect, you can do everything well and excellently, but it doesn't have to be perfect. And I've learned, we talk about balance like it's a place you get to or something you have. I want to have balance. I want to be more balanced. The truth is, if you see somebody balancing, like if they're walking a tightrope or they're doing a yoga pose, there's a lot of adjusting. It's constantly adjusting. And so balance is a verb. It's something you do. It's not a place to get to. It's not something you get. It's a verb. And so what looks like balance to one person doesn't look like balance to another. Maybe one week I'm sitting at home writing at a computer all day. And, for days I'm there alone in my pajamas writing. And another day I may have back-to-back meetings and be attending networking events and be out speaking and giving interviews and that sort of thing. And that's filling that week. But that's what balance looks like. It's some of this and some of this. And the more we balance, the better we get at balancing.
I like
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like your tightrope analogy because
Yeah.
it's not just steady. It's like
Right. And somebody who's a professional tightrope walker, the adjustments are so subtle you don't notice them. But somebody who's beginning, they're probably all over the place. And so it's the same way with balancing. The better you get at it, the more smooth it looks to people outside.
Lovely. Well, I'm gonna get real smooth, and we're gonna like do something with the women
first
first
women.
because
Okay.
women need to see that.
They do.
And they need to be inspired by it. So it's gonna be you are or we're
Okay.
gonna.
Okay.
'Cause it's gonna get out there.
All right. We'll get it
Okay.
out there. Very good.
Myra
Very good.
McElhaney, woman who goes for it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jolene.